You're tuned to Radio Kidnappers, the voice of Hawke's Bay. This is the Acupuncture on Air program. It's our pleasure, as always, to have in the studio Heiko from the Acupuncture Clinic in Hastings. How you going, Heiko?
I'm very good, Ken, and unfortunately we've lost spring. Sort of a bit of a kick back to winter again. Or?
Yeah, I was just thinking last weekend, it almost got the barbecue fired up.
Yeah.
And then look at this week. It's been pouring with rain and pretty miserable, but never mind. The good thing about it is we're still above ground.
Yeah, we are, and we're going to be talking about acupuncture and ulcers today, but in particular for ulcers in the digestive system, like as what's often called a peptic ulcer.
Peptic ulcers. Now, I don't know much about it, but it sounds painful. What causes peptic ulcers?
Yeah, well, there's a number of causes, and one of them, ironically, is actually caused by medication. You're trying to take a medicine to get better, and that actually causes you to have, which is, you've probably heard about those, what they call NSAIDs, the sort of non-steroidal medications which they use for pain.
Yes.
And then there's a lot more sort of evidence and coming out about them that they're causing lots of problems, and one of them is peptic ulcers. So.
Right. Now, it sounds serious, but I have no doubt in my mind at all that you can sort it out with acupuncture or herbs.
Yeah, acupuncture and herbs, and it's and even for the skeptics, it's actually even recommended as a treatment. Acupuncture is recommended as a treatment by the World Health Organization, and they usually have a pretty good authority on what's good and bad and doesn't work, and you know.
Yeah. And what about the cause of it? I mean, according to the acupuncture traditional outlook, what do the old Chinese think caused that sort of stuff?
Again, there are a number of causes. A common one, actually, we say comes from the liver, and we say when the liver gets overburdened, then we say, and I can sort of show it on you here, you know, you've got your liver over here, and we say then it attacks, it overloads and attacks sideways. It goes to the centre, which is where your stomach and everything is, and then that causes like heat and fire and burning, and then it causes the stomach to become overactive, and literally too hot, too fiery, burns away and causes like an ulcer. You know?
Right. Yeah, and of course, what we're going to use to treat that, sort of that, you use cold to treat cold, you use hot to treat hot.
Yeah,
you're going to use Moxa.
Combination of that, and there's also other causes that's not from the liver. So, example, it's from the stomach. It could be constitutional, as we know, everyone's born with a little bit of a imbalance of strengths and weaknesses, or it can be from environment, work, diet, and attitude and so forth. But yeah. Too much hot food, hot, fiery, spicy food, particularly if your stomach has a little bit of a weakness, say it's adding fire to more and more fire, and eventually it burns a big hole. But then ironically, in terms of Chinese medicine, you can also get a stomach ulcer, a peptic ulcer, that comes from cold.
Hard to believe, isn't it?
And that's where, you know, sometimes you'll meet people, hear about people if they have an iced drink, their stomach feels a bit upset, or if they have too much sort of cold raw food, you know, unless it's sort of warm, bland and cooked, they're okay. And this can be a cold thing, and this is when the Moxibustion can come in really well. And as we know, like last week we spoke with Kane about Moxa. And you can put the Moxa onto the stomach, which I often do with either with the stick or these little like stick-on Moxas, and it's to warm. And often the abdomen will feel cool, and that's like one of the sort of diagnostic parameters that we use. If a patient will lie down, I'll come over, and then I'll feel the stomach, and it can feel cold or it can feel cool, you know.
I noticed that in the last few shows we've actually been talking more and more about Moxa as a treatment. Would you treat patients 50-50 needle Moxa, or is it a different ratio?
For me personally, and I think I can speak for people like Kane as well, many acupuncturists, the Moxa is an integral part of the acupuncture treatment. And as I mentioned, the actual word acupuncture in Chinese is two words, Zhenju. One means sticking a needle and one means burning of herbs. So, you know, it's often a 50-50 deal. you know, and I could say more than likely, you know, in 90% of my patients, I'm doing moxa and needles. You know, I rarely do just moxa. I do have some patients who are very, very fearful or sensitive to needles of any sort, and I say it's fine.
Moxa will do the job.
We do moxa.
Yeah.
You know, so that's the beauty about it, and not so much here, but certainly in China, in Korea, in Japan, you have specialist clinics where they're only doing moxa. So that's just to show that how effective it can be.
What about if we've got an ulcer? Obviously, we might take something like antacids, chew them, swallow them. Are they doing us any good, or should we be using herbs for that?
Again, the Chinese herbs are used for ulcers, and again, if you think about an ulcer as a sort of this sounds gross, but you know, this hot sort of burning thing inside the stomach.
Growing.
You know, you need to sort of like to fill it up with some sort of like, you know, white powdery type stuff.
Yeah.
And one of the medicines that we use, and I have mentioned it on the show before, is that, you know, the dried cuttlefish that you see along the beach at Waimarama there.
So can you just go and pick them up and grind them up and use them or not?
Well, yeah, in Chinese herbal medicine, that would be one of the ingredients of a herbal formula, say, for treating a peptic ulcer, and it might be in combination, you know, with some licorice root, and there'd be many other herbs depending on the person's condition. But yeah, it's that sort of white, and a lot of these herbs are these sort of white calcium type herbs that you know, we say absorb the acid and help to repair the hole, if you like.
We often see, and I guess mainly on television programs, that, you know, people got ulcers, and people say stress causes ulcers. Is that the cause of an ulcer in real world?
Well, in terms of Chinese medicine, yeah, we can definitely say that the stress. But again, we've got to be sort of mindful of, you know, what actually is stress, because it's such a broad word. But I'm looking at stress in terms of, like, you know, an over, you know, reaction to outside mental, emotional events. You know, an overpowering boss, or an unhappy spouse, or, you know, too many demands from children. You know, road rage. You know, driving from Havelock to Hastings.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah, that's right. I wonder that we've all had those scenarios that you've just mentioned, but why don't we all get ulcers?
Well, see, that's, I mean, you know, stress affects people in so many different ways, and that's why it tends to be a little bit of a cop-out sometimes, where, you know, the Western science, they can't diagnose it. It's your itchy elbow, it's stress.
Yeah.
Well, then the patient says, well, I'm not feeling stressed. Oh, well, it must some hidden stress you don't know about. You know?
Yeah, that's right. You don't know you've got stress.
Yeah. And usually then I'll say it's not stress. If you're not feeling stressed, if you're not feeling anxious, irritable, or upset, or something about some kind of, you know, emotional response, then I say, well, it's certainly not a mental stress.
Yeah.
There might be stress, and using another word, because, you know, the vegetables you're eating have been sprayed with 1080, and your liver is getting stressed out trying to process it. But getting back to that stress causes ulcers. So if you're being overwhelmed and burdened with all the emotional things from work and home, and, you know, in society and TV and reading the news and whatever, that comes back to the liver. It overloads the liver. That's the big one that gets hit by this mental stress in sort of traditional Chinese terms. And again, then it attacks the emotion. It's like the over response to the emotional thing attacks the physical, and you end up with almost like you haven't dealt with wow, I'm so angry with the boss, but, you know, I can't, like, shoot him, so you know, hits the stomach and gives you a peptic ulcer. And then every time you hear the boss, your stomach gets
knotted up.
So it's a two-edged sword. So you got to fix the stomach because it's been damaged. So acupuncture, herbs, moxibustion. But then you got to, you know, from the lifestyle point of view, we got to say, well, you got to, maybe you can't quit your job, you know, but, you know, maybe you need to start doing yoga, to do Tai Chi, you need to start walking your dog.
Chilling out.
Yeah, you got to, I don't know, do Pilates or do something to get on top of it.
or go into a scream room.
And then what I say is, like, you just get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, you hang outside King's house and you have a run with him.
Yeah, exactly.
That'll fix everything.
That's right. No, I hate running in the morning. I run at night. Anyway, you said earlier that there's been some research on peptic ulcers and acupuncture. Is there any way that acupuncture could be demonstrated to actually really affect the stomach?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, because the research that's generally is always around, well, does it help the pain of the ulcer, or is the patient feeling better? Are they taking less medications? But if you actually sort of want to see, like the real, does acupuncture actually really do something? And I think we've got time. I'll just reiterate this story, that it was on the first day when I went to China with my students groups back in 1984, and they took us into the surgery ward, and then there were the acupuncturist and the surgeon and stuff there, and then the head doctor then says, well, who believes here that acupuncture can actually change a physiological aspect within inside the body, or who just believes it's like, you're stimulating these imaginary points on these imaginary lines, that's then thing. And then we sort of didn't want to say anything, and then he says, all right, well, have a look at this. And then they had a patient there, and he had some stomach problem. I don't know if it was an ulcer or whatever, but anyway, they put the tube down his throat with a little camera on it, because this was just like in the early 80s. It was just the first when this was starting to happen. And then you could see up on the monitor, the picture of inside the stomach. And then he went to an acupuncture point below the knee on this patient. He put in the needle, he inserted it, he was lifting it up and down and twisting it, because there's a certain technique that you do with acupuncture. And then you could literally see the stomach, like
flexing,
sort of opening up and closing. Wow. And you could see, it was secreting the digestive juices, right? And it was like, wow, it was like, it actually does this stuff, right? And then he'd stop manipulating the needle, and then it would calm down again. And it was lucky that then he actually asked me to do it, So then I held the needle and then was lifting it up and down. Wasn't doing anything, but again, I wasn't as skilled as him. And then he helped and guided me. He said, no, grab the needle tighter and lift it, and focus, do this, twist it 6 times here, this direction, all these little things. And then, wow, and then all the students were going, wow, you're doing it, it's amazing. And it was like you could see this connection, right? And then, of course, then it just made you realise, like, when we are treating the heart meridian, well, we're doing something there. We're changing the electrics there in the heart. Maybe they can't measure that or see that yet, but and now, of course, with research, they've shown that you can stick in some needles and measure the kidney function. You can do a brain scan, and then afterwards, you can see certain areas in the brain have been lit up. And then when that happens, certain hormones are being released. Like it's quite amazing, really, where I think acupuncture will go into the future.
It does again beg the question. You've been there, you've seen it, you've done it yourself.
Yeah.
Why aren't we, as a Western world, embracing that?
Well, I have to say,
more than what we are, for instance. Yeah,
it's a slow and long change, and the example that I always use is that the modern Western scientific medical doctor who's been around since like the 1600s, right? It took them nearly 400 years to finally stop prescribing lead and arsenic and mercury.
Yes, I suppose.
Right? And yet, you can trace back historically, there were lots of doctors already in the 1600s were saying, I actually think this stuff that we're doing is not good. I think it's actually worse for you. I think it makes people more sick. And then you'd have, no, it can't be. This is what we've always been doing. It has to be good.
So right? Give it another 400 years.
It was still like in the 1870s, when you think we were pretty sort of with it, pretty modern. We had trains and electricity was just starting to come on. And doctors were still like, no, we prescribe lead and arsenic and mercury. It's
good for you.
And Chinese medicine-wise, in the 1600s, they went through that. They tried it as well, but by the 1600s, they said, no, this stuff's definitely bad for you.
Yeah.
Makes it worse.
Yeah, let's get rid of it.
Stop using it. So that's a bit like we know with the acupuncture. I mean, in the 70s, it was like it's complete nonsense. It's complete, bamboo nonsense. But more people are using it. Well, well, maybe, and then have one little research program, and now it's reached a point. I think there's over 30,000. This is in the West. 30,000 research programs that have been done, say, in the last 30 to 50 years. Now more than physiotherapy, more than chiropractic, more than because it's like, well, it actually is doing something, and you have other professions, including Western medical doctors, who then will study a little bit of acupuncture. So
there's hope.
Yeah, and it is happening, and I think the fact that in New Zealand now, within our organisation, we have over 700 members from Northland to Invercargill. We're covered with ACC. We have colleges in Wellington and Auckland. Teaching at a bachelor's degree level. You're able to do master's degree. So yeah, I mean that in itself is quite symbolic of where the profession is going.
Just about out of time before we get to your song of the week, which is a relatively new one. Just remind our listeners, if we want to get hold of you, where are you, Heiko?
Yeah, well, I'm working for the Acupuncture Clinic, and once you go to my website, it's acu123.co.nz. I'll put that down in the comment section on the YouTube as well. I'm in Hastings. I've got another colleague, John, who works in another clinic down in Marsden, so if you need any work there, just contact me and we can go from there. But our song, I thought, because last week I was in the pretty bad books, and this week I thought I'd try to spruce it up a bit, and I've got from someone I think you've heard of him, Paul McCartney.
Yeah, I might have heard of him.
You might have heard of him, yep. It's just one from his recent album, and the song is called, I have to even look it up here, it's Everybody Out There. And I've played it. It's okay.
You like it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's off his album called New, his 17th studio album, solo studio album done by Paul McCartney. Can't tell you anything more about it because I haven't heard it at all. In fact, I didn't even know it existed until you did send me the notes. But I did a bit of research on it, and for instance, on that album, here's a staggering statistic for you. Paul McCartney plays 18 different instruments, including guitar, bass guitar, percussion, but some weird things like he plays the washboard, he plays the cymbals, the noni, whatever that is, and the bouzouki. Right,
okay.
What a guy. What a talent, eh?
Yeah, and just tell you one thing very quickly before we run out of time about Paul McCartney. Well, I've always been impressed with him because he actually wasn't originally a bass player. He was actually a piano player.
Was he really?
Yeah.
Didn't know that.
And then they needed the bass player because it was too hard to carry the piano around, like touring and stuff, right? And of course he's left-handed, right? And then so he played it, and then they gave him a right-handed bass guitar, so he played the bass upside down.
Yeah.
And he worked it out like instantly how to play it.
What a guy.
Right? And I think of that, and it's like, well, there's obviously something happened inside his brain chemistry that that we don't have.
And he couldn't even read. He couldn't even read music.
Yeah. Well, he doesn't need to.
Genius.
He knows how to play an instrument upside down for the first time picking it up. I don't think he needs to worry about it.
Good on you, Heiko. Talk to the same time, same place
All right,
next week.
I'll be here.